So this is module 3, which I've imaginatively entitled Projects. What I should have said really is, let's create a project. Let's imagine that this is day 1. You've taken control of your laptop, you've got your modeling tool installed, you've got Microsoft Word, you've got Microsoft Excel, and you have some specifications or some idea of what it is, the advice that you're going to give, so you're in a position to begin work. A project is the basic unit of work in the Intelligent Advisor universe. When I go into the modeler and I click New, the option I have is, first of all, is a new project. Project is composed of multiple Word and Excel and other files, not really important at this stage. But delivering and sharing that project with the outside world or with your colleagues, as we've seen already, there's a whole process around the idea of sharing it with something called a hub and deploying it through something called a hub. Every project is different. It'll depend on the rules that you're building and how you intend to let the outside world get at them. But I think it's safe to say that any Oracle Intelligent Advisor project will have at least 3 of the following. And you should recognize those 5 bullet points as being the 5 tabs or the 5 areas of interest inside the modeler. And if you don't remember it, I've actually put little markers on them here. You can see project, rules, data, interview, and then debug. Because they're typically the things that you will do in any project. Some of them are optional. For example, you might not have an interview. There may not be a user interface. It may be you're exchanging data invisibly with another application so that there's no actual human consumer. But by and large, you can expect to see at least project, rules, and data in every single piece of work you do with Oracle Intelligent Advisor. Let's drill down a little bit into what actually a project is. And in the demo, we'll create a project and walk through these, so if you didn't have time to catch them now, you can catch them in a few moments. When you create a project, you give it a name. Sounds simple enough, but that could be the name of the law that you're implementing, or the name of your company, or the name of a particular set of business requirements. The name at this stage is all about giving you and your colleagues an idea of what this is about. When we come to share it with the outside world, when we come to give it to the consumers, we get to choose another name, which is pretty cool because most of the time the internal name is not probably something you'll want to share with the outside world. The second bullet point goes into a lot of detail, but all I want to focus on is the project is the container. And it's not just a container for Word and Excel, it's a container for a whole bunch of other things. Value lists, PDF files, test cases, references, links to other projects. So the project really is the kind of the envelope that has everything else inside it. At any time, you can go back and look at those details using something we call the summary pane, which I'll show to you in just a moment. So you can always refer back and say, oh yeah, this is the one that I wrote for such and such a requirement, or this is the one that I decided to write in Japanese, or whatever. The 4th bullet point reminds us that everything you do in Microsoft Word and Excel particularly will be stored in My Documents by default. Doesn't have to be, and in fact when I do my demo you'll notice that I've decided to store some of my work in different folders. I would always stress to you this: if you're just, pardon the expression, playing and learning, then it's fine to store everything on your hard drive and do nothing else with it. But remember what I said in the opening chapter. There's a whole functionality around the idea of sharing your work and keeping record of versions. So you'll need to be thinking that, okay, I need to share this with the hub. You'll hear me say it a lot, is remember to put this on the hub so that it's available to your administrators. The final point is this, and this is something that we use quite a lot on our website, is it is possible to offer someone a zip file and say, here's my project, so that they can open the zip file and take a look at what you were doing. So if you're just a couple of colleagues playing around, you can then easily share work to see what each other have been doing. But I restate what I said a moment ago. It's all about sharing in the hub in a real-world scenario. So briefly, You can either open existing projects or create new projects. Notice the other button. So if you've got them in multiple folders, you might find yourself having to click on that and go and find the particular folder. When you create a project, it's saved first of all locally, but you'll want to put it on the hub. And the hub will help you keep versions, which as you grow in terms of the team that works on OPA, you'll suddenly realize how important it is to have a good tracking mechanism. And that's where the hub comes in. The two biggest questions that you have to ask yourself right at the beginning is, when you create a new project, is, well, what language am I writing this in? And what region is it for? And as a subtext to that, what's the time zone? The language is the language you would write the rules in Word and Excel. So I popped in a screenshot of some rules written in French. So in that case, the language was set to French France. The region is something a little more subtle. It's to do with how dates and numbers and other things are displayed. In America, for example, you'll find, as we know, that the dates inverse, for me as a Brit, the day and the month. That's a regional issue. So you need to think about, well, what are my consumers expecting in their HTML website? Hey, it's an American website or it's a Canadian website. The time zone is very useful when you're integrating with other systems. If your intelligent device is offering an appointment tomorrow at 3 p.m., well, we need to know what time zone the 3 p.m. is so we don't give someone the wrong appointment. Let's now focus on some basic but actually very practical stuff. Writing in Word, I said it earlier, but now we're looking at a very a tangible example thereof. Every time you work in Microsoft Word, you will be formatting your text. And it'll be kind of like a four-step process. Write the text, format it, then click that validate button, which I mentioned to you earlier, and I've said rejoice meaning that if you get a message that says everything's okay, typically speaking, that's the time you take a big deep breath and say, cool, I just wrote something, I gave a good piece of advice. We'll see all of these in the demo. I'm going to just ask you to focus in on what's written on that Word text for a moment. It says, the request for a liquor license is accepted if the verification, the sanitation criteria are satisfied and the background check is complete. You can probably tell by the structure of that sentence that there's an underlying way I'm explaining my advice. To put it more simply, there are two different colors in this Word document, the yellow and the black. When I write this text, something very clever happens behind the scenes. The modeling tool assesses what I've written and interprets it and creates what we call attributes. If this is not making much sense right now, it will once you see a demo because it'll give you a chance to see it step by step. But an attribute is a piece of information. I've said this already, let's say it again. Give yourself some space. Put blank lines between what you're writing. Don't cram it all up together. Use the headings, add comments. It's a Word document. And this is probably a key thing. There's no requirement to keep everything in one file. I keep saying, add folders, add documents. In fact, I would say that being able to do this can be a real advantage, because if you're working from existing documentation, maybe somebody's handed you a PDF and said, these are the rules we need to implement. Maybe that PDF is broken down into chapters or broken down into legal paragraphs. You could replicate that structure inside policy modeling. So asking your colleagues to help would become easier because we'd recognize where the documents were and what they were referring to. The second point is a key one, is it doesn't matter how many Word documents you have. When you write something in a Word document, it becomes visible everywhere. You don't have to worry about copying and pasting between documents. If it's in a document in the project, it's visible inside the project. We're about to jump into some practical demonstration, but before we do that, let's look at some really key, important, basic principles. When you're writing in Word, write basic but complete sentences. Don't leave it hanging. Remember, if you're expressing something that like a is it or isn't it, there should be a verb. The verb is, or to be in this case. Avoid emotive language like you must do this. Firstly, because that's not really very professional. You are required to do this, or the law says that you should do this, but must, and then we get into you should or you should not. Think about how people will interpret this, and think about how OPA would interpret it as well. Add lots of space, said it 4 times now. Add comments, said it 4 times now. Later, we'll see there are lots of extra features to help you, for example, tag areas in your document so that you can find them again easily. One of my favorites is the ability to find out where you've used something before. And in the demo, we're going to see all of those features rolled into day 1 of our project. So I'm going to click New Project, and I'm going to call this project Aviation, because I'm talking about a pilot and I want to examine a mythical advice scenario is I have a plane that needs to take off and I have a pilot in front of me and I need to know if this pilot is authorized to take this plane up in the air. You could think of it as maybe I'm testing a pilot to see if they have the capacity or the experience necessary to fly a particular kind of plane. Notice that I've said the project language is English American, and I can pick from the various lists. If I was to choose Français, then I would be writing my Word documents in French. I'm speaking to you today from the United Kingdom, so my Oracle Policy Modeler says, well, we think you're in the United Kingdom, so we're going to show dates and numbers using the United Kingdom format. The folder is going to be Oracle Policy Modeling Projects / Aviation, so it's a physical project on the disk, and I'll click Create. So now I have my Word document. I'm going to go straight in, open up the Word document, and talk you through those 3 or 4 big pieces of vocabulary like attributes, like entities, and so on. I'm going to write out the pilot is authorized to fly the plane if the pilot meets the credibility criteria and the pilot meets the health criteria. 3 things to look out for. 1, right now I've written some text and you'll notice that I used the return key, the enter key, to break it into sections. At the end of each line I'm using the return key to come down to the next line. This is very important. Secondly, I've built it in a way that should look reasonably familiar to anyone who's ever worked with something like an Excel-based tool where I'm saying, if something happens, do this. Thirdly, right now, this piece of text is invisible to Intelligent Advisor. Because you'll remember I said to you, this comes in 4 stages. Write the text, format the text. So I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm going to format this. So I select a line and I click Conclusion, and it changes the format. Then I'm going to select the other 2 lines, and I'm going to select Level 1, and they will also be formatted. What does that tell you? It tells you that every time you write something in Oracle Intelligent Advisor, it needs to be formatted for it to be visible. Bonus, if you don't format it, it's invisible. So if you need to leave a comment, like for your colleague, and say, I'm sorry, I didn't get a chance to finish this, as long as you don't format it with one of these formats, it's invisible, but it's still visible to you, of course. Thirdly, once you've formatted this, it's still not visible until you click the magic Validate button. And when the Validate happens, lots of things happen behind the scenes. I get a message saying no error is found, which is a good deal. And I'm going to close this document and I'm going to show you what's happened behind the scenes. But before we leave this document, you'll notice how my paragraph has a very specific structure. Conclusion followed by what I'm going to call conditions. What are the conditions that must be met for the pilot to be authorized to fly the plane? You'll get very familiar with writing things in this format as you work with Intelligent Advisor. Back in the Policy Modeling tool, I'm going to switch to the Data tab. And you'll notice that when I clicked Validate, that's actually when it happened, new information has been pasted here automatically to tell me that the tool has analyzed what I wrote and has identified 3 pieces of data. 3 pieces of data which correspond to the 3 lines. 1 is a goal, 2 are inputs, and if you think about it, the pilot being authorized or not. That really is the goal. And they've all been marked as Boolean, so it's understood that these are all yes-no questions. Of course, not everything in Oracle Intelligent Advisor is yes-no, but as a start, you can see that it's parsed. It's assessed what I've written and interpreted it to create a data model, which is really very clever. If I double-click one of these, you'll notice that it has actually gone so far as to imagine different versions of the same text. Because if a pilot can be authorized to fly the plane, maybe he can be not authorized, or maybe we don't know if he's authorized or they're authorized or not. So don't be surprised when you write something in Word that if you suddenly realize that behind the scenes, Intelligent Advisor is busy creating different versions of what you've written. The reason for this should be fairly evident already, is we're going to need some of these, but it also helps prepare for the consumers who are going to consume your rules. The final part of this demo is a feature that everybody needs to know about. I'm going to just select this line and I'm going to right-click. This is called the Where Used feature. Where did I use this piece of data? And a pop-up window will appear, which I can pin here, and I'll bring it up into the top of the screen. You'll notice that this is a clickable zone. So I can go immediately to somewhere that I talked about this concept. Trust me that when you have 15 documents and you can't remember all the different places you use something, this is going to be a very useful feature. And I like the fact that you can keep it up on screen, and you can even keep I'll have to move that one out of the way a little bit more. You can have multiples on screen and say, okay, now I need to go back to look at this. Now I need to go back and remember what I did. Now I need to go look at this document. When you have multiple documents, this is a real bonus. So that demo took us through some really important ideas. Creating a project, formatting text in Word, validating in Word, and observing the behavior of the Data tab. The Data tab has been filled with information because of what we wrote. The one piece of vocabulary I'm going to add to my demo is the word attribute. An attribute is any piece of information that you wrote that has been understood in theory by Oracle Intelligent Advisor. So every time you write, you would expect to be using attributes or creating new attributes. So that concludes our little demo for this chapter on getting ready and building our first project.